price stability, let's take a look. First off, please watch this video and the PowerPoint presentation before you continue on. So, what is inflation? The textbook defines it as a sustained increase in the general average price level over time. So, this is where prices are increasing. That's what inflation is. So, how does the government get involved? While the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA, is a government body with the responsibility for achieving stability of the Australian currency, they ensure that Australia has a stable value of the dollar in terms of its purchasing power over goods and services. So the government aims to keep inflation between 2 to 3% per annum. They believe this is the sustainable rate. They need this flexibility for monetary policy to operate efficiently, or effectively, sorry. And we'll look at that at Unit 4 later down the course. So why don't we aim for 0% inflation? While small amounts of inflation actually allow for a reduction in real prices of some products without a reduction in the nominal price. So guys, remember back in chapter 4 we looked at real versus nominal GDP? Well, those terms, those keywords there, real and nominal, are exactly the same for every economic term. So in this case, real prices is prices after accounting for inflation, while nominal price is just a black and white price. So in this case, small amounts of inflation can actually make the real price of stuff, so the price of goods and services, cheaper than it originally was, without impacting the nominal price. So you guys could actually get more for less. Even though it might not look like you are, because of the nominal price, you actually can get more for the total income that you have. So some inflation is produced because the quality of a product has improved, which may not be noticed in the CPI figures. So for example, inflation is at 5%, but the quality has increased by 12%. The true increase in the value of the product is 7%. It's not reflected in its price. So it may cause other economic problems like growth rates that are too low, increased unemployment, or even deflation in the economy. So this leads to this section here. What is deflation? And how's it differ from disinflation? Well, deflation is a sustained decrease in the general or average price levels, which means that on average prices are falling. Disinflation refers to a fall in the rate of inflation. So if we look at this diagram here, deflation only occurs at this point here, where prices actually go negative, where it goes below zero. So the general price increases have been negatively impacted. That's deflation. Disinflation is where the rate of inflation has been reducing. So in this case, it's occurred here, it's occurred here, it's occurred here to a certain point, it's occurred there, 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 there. You get the idea. So when the prices, so inflation's still occurring, but it's occurring at a lower rate than previous quarters. Alright, so that's disinflation. So deflation can be negative to any economy. I know what you're thinking, but if prices are cheaper, would that mean it's good for everyone? Yes, you should be able to buy more stuff than you ever would before, but would you actually do it straight away? That's the thing. In society now, some people delay their spending on big ticket items because they know prices are going down. For example, mobile phones. Some people do not buy the latest iPhone when it comes out. They wait a year where prices decrease as the new model comes out before they decide to purchase it. So what will happen? Well, think back to our circular flow model. That circular flow model will be slowing down. People will be delaying their spending. This will impact both businesses and consumers as a whole. If businesses are starting to see a slowdown in their sales, do you think they need their workers there working at 100% efficiency and effectiveness? Probably not. So, a few things will happen. Just like now. They'll either cut back on their hours worked, or they might just lay off a few people in order to sustain the levels of production which will still be profitable for the business. Either way, the household sector will receive less income. What happens when they receive less income? They buy less goods and services, and this puts further strain on businesses' ability to earn profits. So, how does it lead to a drop in wages? Well, think of it this way. If unemployment levels start to climb, do you think people are willing and able to accept a lower price in order to get a job? Probably, right? Because if you have 10 people chasing the one job, a business is not going to base it on just skill alone. They're going to look at who's the cheapest, who can offer the most value for them. And if that's the case, you might see a drop in wages occurring. And those existing workers in there may be willing to accept a pay cut, because if they don't, the businesses could easily just fire them and hire someone who's willing to do the job for less. So that's why, in essence, deflation can have a negative effect on the economy. It delays spending, so the circular flow model slows down, and at the same time it drops people's wages, so people can buy less goods and services as a result of it. So measuring inflation, CPI. So the Consumer Price Index is used to calculate inflation. It's calculated by the Australian Bureau of Statistics on a quarterly basis to determine the change in prices of products purchased by average Australians. So in this statistics they compile, they do this based on 100,000 products, which is generally purchased by 2/3 of the population. They call the 100,000 products a basket, so a basket of goods. The basket is then broken down to 11 larger groups and broken down again into subgroups. Weightings are attached to each group to reflect their importance to the standard Australian household. So here you go. These are the 11... Oh, these are not the 11 groups, but these are some of the groups, and then some further breakdowns of those groups. So on average, Australian households spend $14.25 per week on goods and services in the 12 months to June 2016. So ladies and gents, there you go. So this is the latest data that we had from a census, I'm assuming, because I can't seem to find any more current information. So you can see that housing costs eats up a significant portion of people's incomes, followed by food and transport and recreation. Then all this random other stuff eats up their income. So as you can see that the proportion of weekly spending on goods and services have changed in the last 30-ish years. Back in the 80s, household costs made up a lot less proportion of our income compared to today. Food was more expensive back then compared to what it is now, in terms of measuring it based on proportion of income. Transportation costs were higher. Recreation is higher at the moment. What else has happened? Healthcare is more expensive. Household furnishings are cheaper. Communications more expensive. That's interesting. Clothing and footwear is significantly cheaper. I wonder why. Education's more expensive. Well, that's no surprise. Alright, now let's look at CPI, headline versus underlying inflation. So, they're similar but yet different. So, headline inflation, think of this as your nominal figure, your black and white number. So, this is the 100,000 products. The average price increase of those 100,000 products is headline inflation. Where underlying, there's two ways to measure underlying inflation. We got trimmed mean, and then we got weighted median. So underlying inflation is inflation with the removal of volatile items from the calculation. The reason certain items are removed is because they don't truly reflect the purchase of goods and services of the household. This is due to the substitution effect. Sorry. When the price of an item raises significantly to the relative price of everything else, we seek alternatives that provide similar benefits. For example, when banana prices went up, people substituted for apples. In the end, the government will look at underlying inflation for their measurement of inflation because it's a reflection of the household purchasing power. So if you click on this link here, guys, you'll be able to see some things that are excluded from underlying inflation. So guys, here's the table. Generally, these are the items that are excluded from the calculation of inflation or underlying inflation because of their volatility. So let's look at the two types of underlying inflation. So on the ABIS website, you'll see that there'll be a trimmed mean and also a weighted median for the underlying inflation calculations. And forgive my poor diagram here, but this is the best way I could probably represent what's going on here. So trim mean is the one that the government generally uses when it's measuring underlying inflation, because it removes the top and bottom 15% of the distribution of inflation. So here, this section, this 70% here, is the section of inflation they calculate. They remove the volatile items that had a least significant impact and the one that had the most impact to society. While the weighted median just literally looks for the item that's in the halfway point of the distribution. Whatever that inflation is the calculation of the weighted median inflation. And voila, those are the two types of underlying inflation, and the government uses trim mean as their form of inflation measure if they're looking into the underlying side of things based on the 100,000 products. Alrighty. So this is the latest figures that we got from last December. So just like the GDP figures, every quarter they release the data from the previous quarter. So in March we received the data for December. So in June we'll find out the information for the March quarter. Alright, so as you can see here that food and alcohol are two of the major contributors to inflation, followed by healthcare and transportation. So all the necessities in life or addictions contribute the most to inflation. Education also. No surprise there. So here it is for CPI. It's at 1.8. So headline inflation is at 1.8%. And an underlying inflation, depending if you look at trim mean or weighted median, is either at 1.6, which the government uses, or 1.3, which is another way of measuring it. So we could say in this case that headline inflation is 1.8%, underlying inflation is 1.6%. Balla bing, balla boom. If we're looking at how the government has been meeting its inflationary target goals in the last few years, so you can see that they haven't really reached their average of being 2 to 3%. So you could say that they're failing on their goal of price stability at the moment. So other measures of inflation. We got the producer price index, the wage price index, terms of trade index, which we'll look into in the next area of study, the house price index, and also the pensioners and beneficiary living cost index. These are all different ways of measuring inflation. They look at certain factors, not all factors like the other few.